The rancher never even untied the rope. That was how little he thought the calf was worth. The tiny black calf lay curled against a fence post, barely lifting his head. His ribs showed through his damp hide. His ears drooped. His breathing sounded shallow. Around him, healthy calves stumbled after their mothers across the spring pasture. This one never even tried to stand. Margaret Hale watched quietly. The rancher shrugged. He won't make the week. Silence. Then, what happened? Born small. He kicked gently at the dirt. Wouldn't nurse. Long pause. Vet says even if he lives. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Margaret already understood. The calf represented loss. Feed. Medicine. Time. Most ranchers couldn't justify spending all free on an animal with almost no chance. The rancher sighed. If you want him. Margaret looked down. The calf blinked slowly. How much? The rancher laughed. You serious? Yes. He shook his head. Take him. Silence. For free. Margaret knelt beside the calf. Carefully slid both arms underneath his frail body. He weighed far less than he should have. Almost nothing. The rancher watched her carry him toward the pickup. You're wasting your time. Margaret smiled gently. Maybe. Long pause. But not today. The Hale farm sat on 120 acres of rolling pasture outside Cedar Ridge. Margaret raised beef cattle the way her grandfather Samuel had taught her. Patiently. Quietly. Without shortcuts. Samuel believed every animal deserved attention. Not because every animal became valuable. Because sometimes nobody knew which one would. One autumn afternoon when Margaret was 12, she followed Samuel through a calving pasture. Several newborn calves rested beside their mothers. One tiny red calf struggled to stand. Margaret frowned. That one's weak. Samuel nodded. Yes. Silence. Will it die? He looked toward the calf. Maybe. Long pause. Then why are we helping it? Samuel smiled. Because our job isn't deciding which ones deserve the chance. Those words stayed with her. Years later, they returned the moment she lifted the tiny black calf into her truck. Back at the farm, Margaret converted an old tack room into a nursery. Peat lamps, fresh straw, blankets, milk replacer, everything. Her younger brother Nathan walked in carrying another bale of straw. He stopped. What's that? Margaret smiled. A calf. Nathan looked closer. That? Yes. Silence. He's tiny. I know. Long pause. He looks awful. I know. Nathan watched the calf struggle to lift his head. Think he'll make it. Margaret looked down. I think he'll get every chance. The first week proved brutal. The calf refused bottles, then accepted only a few ounces. He developed pneumonia. Recovered. Then diarrhea. Recovered again. Margaret barely slept. Every 3 hours she fed him. Measured temperature. Mixed electrolytes. Changed bedding. Repeated everything. Again. And again. Neighbors heard about the calf quickly. Naturally. One afternoon Dale Harper stopped beside the barn. Nathan happened to be stacking hay nearby. Dale looked through the nursery door. That's him. Nathan nodded. The free calf. Dale shook his head. No. Silence. What? You're spending all that time. He pointed toward the tiny animal. On him. Nathan smiled. My sister is. Dale laughed softly. She'll spend more raising him than he'll ever be worth. Margaret heard every word. She said nothing. Instead, she warmed another bottle. The calf finally drank the entire thing. For the first time. 2 weeks later. He stood without falling. Margaret laughed aloud. Nathan walked into the barn just in time to see it. He's standing. Yes. Long pause. He actually did it. Margaret nodded. I told you. Nathan grinned. No. What? You hoped. She smiled. Yes. Spring became summer. The calf remained small. Much smaller than every other animal his age. But something else appeared. His appetite. He never stopped eating. Hay, grass, grain, everything. He gained weight steadily. Slowly. Consistently. Margaret named him Atlas. Nathan laughed. For the smallest calf on the farm? Margaret scratched behind Atlas's ears. He won't always be. The county continued joking. At the diner. At the sale barn. At the feed store. People called Atlas Margaret's pet calf. One Saturday morning Dale leaned across the diner counter. How's your house cow? Margaret looked up. He lives outside. Laughter spread around the room. Dale smiled. You know what I mean. Yes. Long pause. You still bottle feeding him? No. Still wasting money? Margaret stirred her coffee. I don't think so. Dale shook his head. You're sentimental. Margaret smiled politely. Sometimes. She never argued. Experience had taught her something. Winning arguments rarely changed minds. Results did. By autumn, Atlas had transformed. Still smaller than average, but balanced, strong, athletic. His legs looked remarkably straight. His shoulders broadened. His chest deepened. Most importantly, he never became sick again. One October afternoon, the local veterinarian visited for routine vaccinations. While examining Atlas, he stopped unexpectedly, then walked around the young bull again. Finally, he looked toward Margaret. Interesting. She folded her arms. What? These feet. Silence. His feet. The veterinarian nodded. Excellent structure. He continued examining. Strong pasterns. Wide chest. Remarkable disposition. Margaret smiled. Good. He looked back at Atlas. Very. Long pause. If he keeps developing like this. He didn't finish. Instead, he simply wrote additional notes. That caught Margaret's attention. Winter arrived. Atlas continued growing. Not explosively. Steadily. His temperament amazed everyone. Calm. Gentle. Easy to handle. Visitors often commented on it. Meanwhile, neighboring ranches complained about aggressive young bulls breaking fences and fighting. Atlas never did. One snowy afternoon, Samuel's old breeding notebooks slipped from a shelf while Margaret searched for vaccination records. Inside, she discovered page after page describing traits worth keeping. Structural soundness, temperament, longevity, fertility. Not one page mentioned size first. Samuel had underlined a sentence several times. The best herd begins with the bull nobody bothered to understand. Margaret read it twice, then looked through the barn window toward Atlas standing quietly in falling snow. The following spring brought the county's annual livestock evaluation day. Young bulls from dozens of ranches gathered for structural scoring before breeding season. Nathan encouraged Margaret to enter Atlas. She hesitated. He's still smaller. Nathan shrugged. So, he won't win. Maybe not. Long pause. But let's find out. Margaret finally agreed. The fairgrounds buzzed with activity. Massive bulls filled every pen. Atlas looked modest beside them. As expected, several ranchers smiled when they saw him. Dale walked over carrying coffee. There he is. Margaret looked up. Morning. Dale nodded toward Atlas. Still got the free calf? Yes. Long pause. Brave bringing him here. Margaret smiled. We'll see. The judges spent the morning moving from pen to pen, checking feet, legs, movement, shoulders, disposition, everything. When they reached Atlas, one judge stopped writing, looked again, then called another judge over. The second judge examined the young bull. Then a third joined them. For nearly 15 minutes, all three quietly studied Atlas. Nobody explained why. Margaret watched from outside the rail. Nathan noticed first. They're taking longer. Margaret nodded slowly. Yes. Neither of them realized those extra 15 minutes would eventually change the future of the entire hail cattle operation. The judges stayed with Atlas far longer than any other bull. They watched him walk. Turn. Stop. Walk again. One judge gently ran his hands along Atlas's shoulders. Another studied his feet. The third simply observed his temperament. Children wandered past the pens. Several bulls snorted and pushed against their fences. Atlas barely lifted his head. He remained calm, curious, completely relaxed. Finally, the senior judge closed his notebook, then looked at Margaret. Where did this bull come from? Margaret smiled. He was a free calf. The judge laughed softly. I meant his breeding. I know. Silence. He came from a ranch about 40 miles south. The judge nodded slowly, then looked back at Atlas. Interesting. That single word followed Margaret home. A month later, the score sheets arrived in the mail. Atlas hadn't won Grand Champion. Margaret never expected him to. But something surprised everyone. He received the highest structural score in the entire evaluation. Perfect feet. Excellent lead conformation. Outstanding disposition. Above average muscling. The comments section contained one sentence circled in red. Recommended as a long-term herd sire. Nathan read it twice, then looked up. They're serious. Margaret smiled. I think they are. The first breeding season arrived quietly. Margaret exposed only a small group of carefully selected cows to Atlas. 23 females. No more. She wasn't trying to build numbers. She wanted quality. Dale Harper heard about it almost immediately. Naturally, he found Margaret repairing a water trough one afternoon. You actually bred cows to that little bull? Margaret tightened another bolt. Yes. Dale folded his arms. You've got courage. Silence. Then, or poor judgment. Margaret smiled. We'll see. The waiting lasted nearly a year. Then the first calves arrived. One. Then another. Then another. Nathan noticed something before anyone else. They all stand fast. Margaret looked up. What? The calves. He pointed. They're on their feet almost immediately. She watched quietly. He was right. Then came another surprise. The calves remained healthy. Very healthy. No difficult births. No crooked legs. No weak pasterns. No respiratory problems. Everything simply worked. The local veterinarian visited during spring vaccinations. He paused repeatedly while examining Atlas's offspring. Finally, he looked toward Margaret. I've vaccinated a lot of calves. She waited. I don't remember seeing this level of consistency. Margaret folded her arms. Good consistency? He smiled. Excellent. Word spread slowly. Neighboring ranchers noticed the calves grazing beside their mothers. Uniform. Calm. Correctly built. One afternoon, a commercial cattle buyer stopped beside the fence. He watched the calf crop for nearly 10 minutes. Finally, he walked over. Those all yours? Margaret nodded. Yes. He pointed toward a black bull calf. Who's the sire? Atlas. Silence. Then, the free calf. Yes. The buyer laughed. You're kidding. No. He spent another 20 minutes studying the calves. Before leaving, he handed Margaret a business card. If you ever sell breeding stock. He paused. Call me first. That summer the county fair returned. This time Margaret entered several of Atlas's yearlings. The competition looked stronger than ever. Large operations filled the barns. Expensive genetics. National bloodlines. Professional fitting crews. Margaret unloaded her cattle herself. As always, several ranchers recognized Atlas standing quietly in the trailer. Dale walked over carrying coffee. There he is. Margaret smiled. Morning. Dale nodded toward the cattle. So these are his calves. Yes. Long pause. They look good. Margaret smiled slightly. Thank you. That compliment surprised her more than she expected. Judging day arrived. Class after class passed. Atlas's offspring consistently placed near the top. First. Second. First again. By the championship drive, people stopped asking whose calves they were. They already knew. The announcer read the final results. Champion heifer. Atlas daughter. Reserve champion bull. Atlas son. Best pen of free. Atlas offspring. The crowd applauded. Not politely. Genuinely. Nathan leaned toward Margaret. Listen. She looked around. The conversation sounded different. Nobody mentioned the free calf anymore. Now people discussed bloodlines. Structure. Disposition. Longevity. Exactly the traits Samuel wrote about decades earlier. After the show ended, ranchers began approaching Margaret one by one. The first wanted 2 replacement heifers. The second asked about breeding rights. The third requested semen availability once Atlas completed additional evaluations. Margaret answered carefully. She refused to rush. Quality first. Always. One evening, she opened Samuel's oldest breeding notebook. Inside she found a page she'd somehow overlooked. Across the top, he had written, Never choose the biggest bull. Choose the one whose daughters you'll still admire 15 years later. She stared at the words for a long time. Because suddenly everything fit. Samuel never chased size. He chased permanence. The following spring demand exploded. Commercial ranches wanted Atlas sons. Seedstock producers wanted daughters. Veterinarians recommended the bloodline for its calving ease and structural correctness. Waiting lists formed. Nathan walked into the office carrying another stack of purchase requests. He laughed. You've got a problem. Margaret looked up. What? Everyone wants calves we don't have. She smiled. That's a good problem. Within 3 years, Atlas sired calves across 4 states. Several sons became herd bulls themselves. Daughters developed reputations as outstanding cows with exceptional fertility and longevity. Agricultural magazines noticed. One reporter drove nearly 200 miles to interview Margaret. During the interview, he asked the obvious question. When did you realize Atlas was special? Margaret looked across the pasture. The old bull grazed quietly beneath a giant oak tree. Older now. Still calm. Still gentle. She smiled. I didn't. The reporter looked confused. What do you mean? I realized he deserved the chance. Silence. The rest. She looked toward dozens of healthy descendants spread across the hills. Was his work. The article appeared under the headline. From free calf to foundation sire. The story traveled farther than Margaret expected. Breeders from neighboring states visited. Then breeders from across the region. Many arrived expecting to see an extraordinary bull. Instead they found something else. A remarkably ordinary-looking ranch. Simple fences. Healthy grass. Quiet cattle. Careful management. Nothing flashy. Everything intentional. One crisp autumn evening, Dale stood beside Margaret overlooking the largest cow herd the Hale family had ever owned. Black cattle grazed across rolling hills. Dozens of calves carried Atlas's unmistakable calm temperament. The old bull stood peacefully among them. Dale folded his arms. "You know what still bothers me?" Margaret smiled. "What? I told you he wasn't worth raising." "Yes. No. Really." Long pause. "I said you'd spend more on milk than he'd ever return." Margaret laughed softly. "I remember." He shook his head. "I've never been happier to be wrong." They stood quietly for several minutes, watching another group of young calves race across the pasture before settling beside their mothers. Healthy, balanced, strong, exactly as Samuel would have hoped. Margaret finally spoke. "You know what Grandpa always believed?" Dale looked over. "What?" "Potential isn't loud." Silence. "It usually looks like extra work." The wind drifted across the pasture. Atlas lifted his head briefly, then returned to grazing. Years earlier, he had been the smallest calf anyone had seen that spring. Too weak to nurse. Too small to matter. A rancher gave him away because keeping him alive didn't seem worth the effort. Most people saw expense, risk, failure. Margaret Hale saw something simpler. A life that deserved one honest chance. She never raised Atlas expecting him to become famous. She never imagined breeders would line up for his bloodline. She never dreamed an entire cattle operation would grow from one forgotten calf. She simply refused to let someone else's prediction become his future. And in the end, the sickliest calf on the ranch became the foundation sire of the finest herd Margaret Hale ever owned. Not because he received special treatment forever, but because someone cared enough to give him the opportunity to become what he was always capable of being.